Don't think for 1 second that because we now have the White House pushing back on this, that we can be asleep or think that it's all taken care of. For one thing, they need people like us to put a spotlight on what's going wrong, to put a spotlight on places like Nationwide and Cleveland Clinic and CHOP in Pennsylvania and in Philly.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Narrative Podcast. Mike Andrews and Aaron Baird joining you today. And Aaron, we got to update the folks at home on the big matchup from the weekend.
Oh, we don't know. Of all the things we had to update.
We teed it up. We teed it up last week. People were asking me, how'd the fantasy football matchup go? Would you like to share? Or
I would not. I honestly, I am offended that you would even bring this up. We have, Mike, big events. We just had the Secretary of Education in our office, and you want to talk about fantasy football?
I do.
For goodness, there are kids that we are trying to help, and you want to talk about how this isn't even right. This can't.
It was like a 35-point beat.
This is
35 points. That's why he doesn't want to talk about this family.
Oh my god!
He does not want to talk about
how did that
the
happen?
fact that he couldn't even clear 90 points.
I don't even know how that's nonsense.
It's all right. There's always this week against a lesser opponent. So good luck to you.
Frank, of all people. Oh man, if I can't beat Frank, he's got Jared Goff starting at quarterback. Good golly,
it's practically a W.
Exactly. That should
got it. You got it. It's gonna be fine.
Man.
But to your point, I am dressed up. I'm wearing a suit today, which is way beyond the norm. I don't particularly enjoy it, by the way, but good reason. As you said, Secretary McMahon was in the building today.
Yes, she was. And so was Senator Moreno, and Governor DeWine came, which we didn't know. We were prepared for Secretary McMahon and Senator Moreno. And then the announcement they were going to make was so big that the governor said he needed to be there too. And so we had the governor here and Representative Click and a number of other folks. So yeah, great day. Apologies if this segment, on top of Mike throwing me off my game on the fantasy football talk, it's a little all over the place because this has been whirlwind 24 hours, but a lot of fun and just an honor to have, Lord willing, the last Secretary of Education in American history.
Yes,
that's what we're going for, at least, if Trump could shut down the Federal Department of Education. But yeah, really an incredible day.
And her press conference and her remarks here in the building about expanding educational opportunities for families just really seem to resonate with what we're doing with OSIN and those opportunities. I know we had some families in the building as well that wanted to talk about how beneficial EdChoice has been to them. Just an exciting thing to see with where we are at educational freedom in Ohio.
Well, and in America, really. I mean, this is the new day of where we are in American politics. I think to have a president, again, and not just Republicans in office have been giving lip service to some of these big conservative priorities for, our whole lives, right? And it was always couldn't you imagine if we could get to a place where we could have more school choice? And I support school choice, but never concrete ideas or plans to make these happen or even executive actions they would take to do, right? And once again, we see with this president that we're actually getting these things through. So having the first ever universal school choice program, and quite frankly, guys, I don't want to make this about CCV, but the fact that the Secretary of Education is coming to Ohio and saying, where am I going to have my press conference on, this was a great announcement. I think it was a $500 million investment in charter schools. So public charter schools, not the schools that we started CCV, but public charter schools that we also are supportive of, right? Having more school choice. We would call these community schools in Ohio law. But to come to CCV to make that announcement just sends such a powerful message, right? Christians and anyone that was remotely social conservatives, like this was, we were always sort of backbenchers, right?
Yeah.
And for this president to recognize how important Christians are, I mean, think about it. The last public event we did in this building, the last time media were in this building, was the abortion amendment press conference we did, right, in 2023. And for the next time we have big media here, it's the Secretary of Education with our senator, with our governor, just is such a strong signal of where their values are, how they view Christians, and what they think is needed in our country.
Yeah, it was an exciting day, to say the least. And, going to make my shameless plug here. Going to be some exciting days coming up here, too.
Oh, my gosh.
Because
We're just getting started, man.
Yeah, we've got a couple of days until our Cleveland Gala, which is all sold out.
Right? Oh, that's all. Yeah, closed off there. Oh, man.
And then Essential Summit, by the time you hear this, we'll release it Friday morning. So you've got 48 more hours,
exactly.
Maybe 60 more hours. Yeah, get tickets to the Essential Summit to come see Willie Robertson. And it's going to be a great day. I'm getting the sense that there's really a lot of enthusiasm building for that event. Just as we've talked about some of what we're seeing culturally with Christianity coming back, and a lot of it's due to the news with Charlie Kirk and seeing how much his faith has been front and center in remembering him. And that was definitely the case too at his memorial. That was a big draw on Sunday. An encouraging thing to watch, a sobering thing to watch, but the gospel was proclaimed, and that was so encouraging for
that was an event like none other. It's hard to put that memorial service into context. Had a number of friends that were at that, and people who, like, I know one buddy got there at 6:30 in the morning.
Wow.
To get a seat. And we watched online, and it's heartbreaking for one. But I don't know if I can think of a clearer example of what the enemy meant for evil, God's going to use for good.
Mm-hmm.
And, Mike, it's hard to, I never want to be overly dramatic, especially on, or speak over my skis on movements of the Holy Spirit. But we have been talking so long about the only hope for our country is revival. Quite honestly, it's the reason, that's maybe the number one reason why we renamed CCV from Citizens for Community Values to Center for Christian Virtue. Was you talk to anybody, any Christian in public office, and when they're in their most sort of sober-minded assessment of the country, they would say, well, the only thing that's really going to save our country is revival.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at them and say, so what are you doing to start revival? And typically it's nothing, right?
Yep.
It's there's no actual, because what is revival? Revival are our hearts turned towards Jesus, right? Revival is not tax cuts or even great things like tax cuts or great things like ending abortion. That's not revival. Revival is knees bowing and tongues confessing that Jesus is Lord. And so we wanted to change the name and make everything we do here about proclaiming Jesus is Lord, so that, as we work on these practical policy issues or these practical problems in our communities, we're working on them, but we're also proclaiming Jesus is Lord and praying and working towards revival. Well, if somebody were to tell you 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War now, and all of these other national leaders stood up in a packed out football stadium and declared that Jesus is Lord, you would say that's probably a sign of revival, right? Like that's and then you were to hear, hey, the previous Sunday to that, like we heard from our friends at Rock City Church, 1,900 people showed up for the first time. I know even at my church we saw more new people than normal. I don't know, Mike. I don't know if people can find your church here in Knox County.
Oh, come on, not that off the
buried in the woods. No, but you hear these reports, and I think this is what it would look like.
Yeah,
and I pray this is what this is. And watching that memorial service just was stirring at the boldness. And you even heard people like J.D. Vance say he's shared his faith more than ever before. I felt that. Maria and I always take our girls to pancakes on Saturday mornings, and Maria came with us this time. Normally we'll let her sleep in. And we always see the same neighbors in our neighborhood when we're walking. And for us, we saw a guy that we've been seeing for a long time, and we said, hey, we're going to invite this guy to church with us, right? And I don't know why we hadn't before, but it just, you just feel that Holy Spirit tug. I don't know. What did you think watching and seeing it?
Yeah, I haven't watched start to finish. It was mostly catching a lot of the highlights. For me, seeing Erika Kirk, the way that she has handled this, because first and foremost, my heart still just breaks for her. Can't even imagine having to grieve as publicly as she had with the position that she's in, first of all. But then to not only extend forgiveness, but then to still just offer such direction and clarity of purpose with what Turning Point wants to do from here on out to carry on Charlie's legacy, but also to advance the kingdom, is just like, how could you even possibly be thinking about that at this time? But yet I think that in that we're seeing some of those seeds that are feeding, or some of what's fueling this revival sense that we're getting could be going on in our country, is just because she is unflinchingly talking about the gospel, even in this unbelievable grief that she's got to be experiencing.
Oh yeah. And I even think too, like, both her grace, but I think what you're describing there is her determination.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's the thing that feels different about this. Right. I mean, even we have recent history to compare this to after both the assassination attempt on President Trump and the Minneapolis shooting. There was such grief that I think a lot of us have felt about what is happening in our country. Seeing the way this grief has turned into, like, okay, we're going to push back hard now. Like, the determination to say, this is not going to be the country we raise our kids in. We gotta do something about this, is powerful. The other thing too that I just have to say, and maybe we need to try to get Megan Basham back on the show, but to me, this is very much the death knell of third way Christianity. People like Rosaria Butterfield, who's going to be at the summit, have talked so much about that. But Charlie Kirk made, especially towards the end of his life, made the proclamation of the gospel first and foremost. However, he also recognized, listen, there are very serious problems in the country that are gospel issues that people are being hurt by, and we have to do something about those. And by his assessment, and by my assessment as well, the best people, the tool best positioned on a public policy and political level to do something about that is the Republican Party. And so he unabashedly got behind President Trump and worked with him on, obviously, issues, like lobbied him on various issues, but encouraged people to go vote, because his assessment was this. And people like Charlie got destroyed by certain sects of Christianity. And you're selling out, and you can never get behind this President Trump. People like Russell Moore and even Tim Keller to some degree, and other people who were friends or I respect, and I still, there's certain things Tim Keller's written that are still very meaningful to me, but they attacked him to say, you're destroying the Christian witness, and the church is going to be falling apart over the next few years. And because of Charlie's boldness and because of the platform he built, 100 million people had the gospel proclaimed to them.
Yeah,
last Sunday.
Yeah, hear that number again? 100 million
on the streaming. Like, I mean, just unbelievable. On top, let alone the stadium full of people there.
Reportedly hundreds of thousands of people who couldn't get in, but were still in the vicinity.
Yeah, that just wanted to be, like, again, it's such a powerful movement. And yeah, just a special moment. And what's up to us now is to make sure this time endures. That's what we're going to be talking about on Sunday. This is, I'll just say, and there'll be more about this. We really feel at CCV that God has put us in a place and a time right now to say, we're going to carry this message forward. I think especially Christian education, getting millions of kids out of public schools, not just in Ohio, but across the country. That's where we're feeling the Lord is leading us. And I think this, I was at a round table with the Secretary of Education this morning. And I said, I remember going into it saying, if I do nothing else, I'm going to proclaim the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And we're going to do that. Every kid in America needs that opportunity to hear that message. And I think what Secretary McMahon was here talking about the federal tax credit and all these other opportunities, this is what we've been called to at CCB and the Christian Education Network, and where we're going from here.
Yeah. Well, we've got a special interview coming up today with Will Hild. This is one of those that took a back seat in the wake of the news with Charlie.
Yeah.
But there was some really big news a couple weeks ago. I think we covered it last week about Nationwide Children's Hospital.
Oh yeah, shutting down their
gender clinic. And Will was doing some great work on this throughout the process. He kind of got targeted by Nationwide for
Nationwide Insurance.
Yeah,
yep.
Nationwide Insurance.
Which notably is not sponsoring the Allies and Advocates Equality Ohio gala this year.
Imagine that.
Which is funny because I feel like a year ago they were. And then I feel like about this time last year, somebody went to the Farm Science Review and said, Nationwide's not on your side. I think that might have been us. I can't remember.
It all blurs together.
It all blurs
together. But Will saw many of the same things that we've talked about here, and it's a great interview. You're going to enjoy it. He's very informative, very knowledgeable about all this stuff, and it was a good conversation to have with him. And we're glad, even though it's a couple weeks ago. So just be aware of the mindset with David and I as we navigated the interview. That was 2 weeks ago. So the world strangely felt very different 2 weeks ago.
Gosh, yeah.
But Will Hild coming up, our special guest today on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. We are back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews and David Mahan welcoming in Will Hild now, who's the Executive Director of Consumers Research, the nation's oldest consumer protection organization. He led the organization's Consumers First campaign, calling out woke corporations for betraying their customers and educating consumers on the dangers of ESG. And Will, you also, not too long ago, we're talking about some of the things that were going on at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and we are excited to be able to talk about this news that came out last week here in Ohio, that Nationwide Children's is going to be ending their transgender clinics and medicines and whatever they said they weren't doing that they were actually doing. They're finally going to be ending those. So we're grateful for this opportunity to chat with you.
Oh, well, I'm happy to be on here, and it's great news and a good thing to talk about, but it's also instructive for corporate America, I think, to hear how badly this can go for them.
So let's just start with, as you looked into this issue, what did you find was actually going on at Nationwide Children's?
Well, what's funny is I actually didn't come to the Nationwide Children's Hospital issue of mutilating children sort of through the front door. It wasn't what I was looking for, at least initially. Our organization has something on our website you can sign up for called a Woke Alert. And it's sort of like a once a week, once every other week text message based system to, if you want to become like an activist to push back on woke corporate America, you can sign up for this and we will send you a Woke Alert occasionally when we find a particularly egregious example of something. And we always make sure to provide contact information for that corporation so that people can push back. And we did a Woke Alert on the phenomenon of companies changing the name of their Department of DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, to the Department of Belonging and changing nothing else. No personnel, usually not even the stock photos on their websites, and nothing about the programs, the discriminatory, racist programs that they were engaging in as part of DEI. They weren't changing that. They were just going to change the name. So we named 5 companies that did this, and amongst them was Nationwide Insurance. And this sort of, caught fire. I was invited on to Fox News and Fox Business channel twice in 2 days to speak about this. And while I was, talking about these issues, apparently they had, unbeknownst to me, they had the Nationwide logo up on the screen. And I was talking about how DEI programs are inherently anti-white and anti-Asian and often even anti-Jewish in the ways that they discriminate against people. So lo and behold, 2 days later, I get a phone call from a rather famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, defamation attorney named Libby Locke, who apparently represents Nationwide Insurance. And she basically called to threaten me that if I didn't retract my statements around how DEI was practiced at Nationwide Insurance, that there would be quote unquote consequences. And she sort of alluded to the idea that she had talked the client down. They were ready to sue me right away, but she had, said, let me talk to Will first and see what we could do. Well, in addition to threatening me, it came out during the phone call that she had already contacted Fox News directly and threatened them related to the comments that I had made. Well, this is a real problem for us because when journalists are threatened like that, it decreases the likelihood of them bringing us back on. In fact, I haven't been back on Fox since. Now, that could just be a coincidence, but it speaks to the damage that those types of false accusations by Libby could make. So I was pretty heated about this. And so I went and I already knew that the Nationwide had engaged in discriminatory activities, but we decided to do a deep dive just on that company. And in addition to finding a myriad of examples of directly racially and sexually discriminatory policies and programs at Nationwide Insurance, I also started looking into their other affiliations. And one of those is, of course, the hospital that bears their name. People may think that Nationwide Children's means nationwide, like it's a nationwide hospital. No. That is a branded hospital the way that like Capital One Arena in DC is a branded arena for Capital One. Nationwide refers to the insurer. And in addition, it's not just that the hospital bears the insurance company's name. Their CEO of the insurer is also the chair of the board of the hospital. So they share management, basically. The top guy at the insurer is the top guy at the hospital. And lo and behold, I go onto a database called stoptheharmdatabase.com. If anyone wants to look up a hospital in their area and find out whether they've been doing these types of barbaric procedures on children, they can go to that website. And they have compiled the numbers and incidences of these hospitals doing these types of just ungodly procedures on children. And lo and behold, I find out that Nationwide Children had done 118 hormone and puberty blocker, I should say it's patients, who knows how many injections, ostensibly be thousands of injections, using cross-sex hormones on children. So, men receiving female hormones, females receiving male hormones. And so they were engaging in this. And so we created an entire campaign. You mentioned at the beginning of my interview, the Consumers First Initiative calling out woke corporations. We decided to do a deep dive just on Nationwide Insurance because of this. We don't take kindly to being threatened. We have the resources at our disposal to push back. But God forbid, what if a citizen journalist had uncovered this information and gone after them, and Libby Locke had been sicked on them? And so whenever we are threatened, our response is to double down. Assuming we are correct, obviously we wouldn't spread lies. But if we have the facts on our side, all that will happen when you threaten us is that we will double or triple down on that. And that's what we did here.
It's amazing to see an article that says that they are shutting down, not just the surgical referrals that actually came out in the hearing that they were doing. They denied that they were doing referrals, and finally, the chairman and one of the House members, kind of pushed the envelope on that piece, and they were definitely, it actually hit the news that they were doing these referrals. But the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones, they've never denied that they were doing those. They just said, it's just only, a handful of kids. And they fought that tooth and nail. I mean, they even as high as to get the governor to put pressure on the state legislature to say, hey, let's, we'll concede on, no surgical procedures on kids in Ohio. But you got to take out the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones from the legislation. That was a huge fight. And to see them just, give all that up at this point when from the way they say it is going to cause kids to commit suicide, which we know it's post surgery that the suicide rate goes up the highest from the best data on the planet. But from your perspective, nationally, what are the factors that force such a sea change in a group like Nationwide Children's? Is it just that they all of a sudden, now that we realize the data is coming out and the Chloe Coles are out there, is it that they're just like, oh wow, this is bad. We've got to stop harming children? Or is it the medical malpractice suits that are starting to hit all across? What is it from your perspective?
That's a great question. And to tell you the truth, this may be an unsatisfying answer, but I think it speaks to the strategy we have to use moving forward. It's all of the above.
Yeah.
The walls are crashing in on these people from all directions, whether you have this Tavistock, or the CAS review, the Tavistock report the CAS review of the Tavistock Gender Clinic in the UK. I mean, just the incredible statistics coming out of that, like you mentioned, the post-operation, post-cross-sex hormone suicide rates, or even the fact that the base level populations of who was getting referred to the clinic had 10 times, I think, the background rate of having a parent who was convicted of a sex offense, meaning that it's highly likely that what was happening is that they were referring people who had been abused sexually or physically to these clinics instead of, showing likely the results and symptoms of trauma and sexual trauma that kids would exhibit. Instead of treating that, they were sending them off to this Dr. Mingala's house of genital mutilation. And what came out of you have that like you said, the factual reporting coming out. You have the change in the administration. I mean, it couldn't have been more of a 180 between the Biden administration, which was doing everything it could to support the genital mutilation of minors and the abuse of minors, to the Trump administration cracking down on these hospitals for doing so. And then you've had at the state level, obviously, Ohio has banned this, as you noted. You've got a lot of other states pushing back. And then last but certainly not least is, if this procedure was any kind of like, a heart bypass procedure or some sort of, any other context, everyone doing it would have already long been put out of business by the tort claims. And I'm glad to see that that's finally coming to play. Just a quick side note that your listeners should be aware of, because they might see this out in the wild. There was a movement, in fact, led by Senator Tom Tillis, who I'm glad to say has since announced his retirement. But there was a movement during the big, beautiful bill to attach language that would have effectively ended the litigation finance industry, meaning financiers putting up money to help fund big, high risk, high reward lawsuits against, really any kind of tort claim, but specifically consumer protection claims. And the thing is, it was played as if, you have this plaintiff's bar out there and they're raising the costs for consumers on all these kinds of products because of these ridiculous lawsuits. And don't get me wrong, I'm no friend of the plaintiff's bar. I can't stand those people. They are a problem. But they are so wealthy, they are self-funding. Morgan & Morgan does not need litigation finance to bring, he's a billionaire. He does not need anyone's money to bring the suits that he brings. What's happening is, increasingly, conservatives are using litigation finance, and we're seeing that in the pushback against these genital mutilation services, suing these surgeons in these hospitals and these facilities for doing it. And so the left was, getting a fake conservative, Tom Tillis, to sneak this language in there to cut that movement off at the knees. So I know that's a little bit of a detour, but it speaks to the fact that we have to have an all hands on deck approach. And one thing I want to warn anyone listening to this, obviously you have a very motivated podcast listening base. These are your activists. These are people making the change in the world. Don't think for 1 second that because we now have the White House pushing back on this, that we can be asleep or think that it's all taken care of. For one thing, they need people like us to put a spotlight on what's going wrong, to put a spotlight on places like Nationwide and Cleveland Clinic and CHOP in Pennsylvania and in Philly. That's what really draws the artillery fire from the administration, because they can see what's going on. So I know it's a long-winded answer to your question, but the truth is it's all of the above, and it's incumbent upon us to stay active and stay pushing. Now is the time. Imagine where we are right now. It's not, hey, we've got the White House so we can go to sleep. It's everything we're doing now has a force multiplier effect. So we should be more excited to be pushing back because it's tripling, quadrupling the effect of what we've been doing.
And I couldn't agree with you more, and especially on the piece where we need to stay more vigilant than ever. As big a story as this is, and as miraculous as it is, the nationwide would pull back on everything. You got to remember that the law, one of the things that we had to kind of concede in the law is those that were already on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones get to stay. They got grandfathered in. Now, thankfully, nationwide is basically saying we're not even serving those kids anymore. We're harming those kids anymore with these drugs. However, we do have Cincinnati still. We have Akron, right? These children's hospitals. That we have Dayton, right? The Rainbow Babies and all. So we have several other facilities that that still need to kind of go the same way, right? And so we need to put pressure on them as well. And then we have other bills that we're working on, right? What we're seeing in the schools, we have the whole Save Women's Sports piece that includes these kids not even be able to go in these locker rooms. These boys not going in the female locker rooms. Well, now we have schools, and Accuracy in Media just put out a couple examples of this. We have school administrators who are saying, hey, if your child has a birth certificate that says that they're another gender, well then I won't tell if you don't tell, right? And so the battle's not done. Like we need to fix these. We need sex-based birth certificates in the state of Ohio. We need to deal with adult women, right, and their private spaces across the state, right? When they're in government buildings. And what about Target, right? What about dressing rooms and Kohl's? And so there's a lot of work to be done here, and so I really appreciate your call for vigilance.
Let me ask you, Will, I'm really fascinated to hear by this consumer aspect of it. As you said, it was kind of a backdoor for you to find out what was going on at the hospital through examining a corporation. So in your work, are you seeing this corporate support for these transgender procedures nationwide? Are we seeing more examples of what was going on at Nationwide Children's Hospital throughout the country?
Yeah, it's actually startling to see how many corporations were supporting this kind of insanity and for how long. This isn't even our first campaign against a company that was engaging in direct material support for this kind of insanity. We were contacted by a whistleblower back in, I believe it was 2022, from State Farm. One of their independent, they sell their insurance mainly through independent contractors who, rep the State Farm brand. And they give them all a budget for activities in the community, which generally has been great. It's been part of the reason that everyone loves State Farm, or did at least, because you'd see that your little league teams would be sponsored by State Farm, the school bake fair would be sponsored by State Farm, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, that company, because of the fact that they had hired, I think, a very woke DEI director, encouraged their independent contractors to buy books from something called the Gender Cool Project that were aimed at kids as young as 5. And the title of the books tell you everything you need to know about it. One of the books was called A Kid's Book About Being Transgender. Another one was called A Kid's Book About Being Non-Binary. And the point of buying these books was then to go, and without telling parents or even customers of State Farm, so there's just no way you could argue that this was to the benefit of the brand, because they were doing it quietly. They were donating them to public libraries and to even public schools to put them in the hands of kids as young as 5. This insane transgender ideology propaganda. And, this was a company, while State Farm, their activities were probably the worst, we looked into the Gender Cool Project, and they have since taken all this down. But at the time, they were sponsored by a whole host of major corporations. So this is unfortunately not a problem that was unique to even Nationwide. Nationwide, obviously, I don't know of any other corporation that was actively having a hospital that bears their name do it to children themselves. But this is a general problem that we're going to have to basically chisel out from corporate America. And one of the dangers that we are going to face is that they're probably going to they have gotten a lot quieter about it during the Trump administration. That doesn't mean that the people who want to engage in this kind of insane mutilation of children, grooming of children, using the corporate apparatus to do so have gone away. Those people have just gotten quieter. And so we're going to have to be very, very vigilant. I just go back one question before. One of the things we're going to have to keep an eye on as well is even at Nationwide, who says they're going to stop doing this kind of stuff. There is a movement within the transgender medical community or genital mutilation community to rebrand what it is that they're doing in a medical sense. And some of the conversations that have come out is that they have talked about, instead of giving kids a gender dysmorphia diagnosis, which then would be what would precede either cross-sex hormone injections or the surgeries, giving them a gonad, like a hypogonadism or a hypergonadism diagnosis. Meaning what they would say is, you don't have gender dysphoria. We'll stop using that term. What you have is your testes are you're really a woman, but you have overproductive testes giving you too much testosterone, you see? Or you're really a man, but your ovaries are overactive. They're producing too much estrogen for a man's body, right? Which of course is insanity, but if insanity was a barrier to whatever they were doing, we wouldn't be here in the first place. So we're going to have to keep a real eye on these people are not going away. I mean, the level of evil you have to be already engaged in to be in this movement. They're not just going to say, oh, well, you got it, she made it illegal, we'll respect the law. They are going to try and find alternative paths to engage in the same kind of behavior. And we're going to have to keep an eye on that.
No doubt. Will, so I asked the question one way, and that's, what is forcing the turnaround? But just based on some of the insanity that you just mentioned, what would cause, a respected hospital, right, like Nationwide Children, to go down this path anyway? Right. If they're only messing around with like 118 kids, right, based on the data that we're seeing, they're bringing in, just under 70,000. Of course, they're getting lifelong patients, right? I'm sure that they may be getting kickbacks from the plastic surgeons down the line and have to keep fixing the fixes. But what would cause a hospital, right, prestigious hospital like this, to even gamble all of this? What causes that?
I think that's a great question. And a lot of people like to make it about the money, which you brought up is like one potential theory. But I agree with, it sounded like you were a little bit dubious that was the entirety of their motivation. And I am as well. I really think what this comes back to is the professional LGBTQ political movement. When you look at these corporations during the fight for gay marriage, allowed themselves to be hijacked by the Human Rights Campaign and a whole host of other LGBTQ organizations. They hired staff from those organizations, or I should say they hired staff whose main job was to brag to those organizations about how friendly they were to the LGBTQ political movement and its aims. And once you start allowing that type of fifth column inside the company, it becomes its own lobbying group. It lobbies both for its own gain, because obviously no matter what department you're running within any entity, we've seen this in government, you want it to be bigger, you want a bigger budget, you want to make more money. So there's that normal incentive that people within the movement have to grow their department. But then there's also, you're hiring people that are going to be part of that movement. That's their political bailiwick or political bugaboo. And so they're always going to want to be getting the corporation more involved in doing the bidding of HRC and other LGBTQ organizations. And those organizations took on, after Obergefell, those organizations took on the trans political movement as their next big goal. And so they pushed a lot of these corporations to directly, materially, and optically support all of these things. And I mean, you have to ask one question, why, if Nationwide, the insurer, is getting involved in all that stuff, I think they had like 100% rating from HRC for years and years and years. They may still have that. So it wouldn't, it's a hop, skip, and a jump to have the hospital that bears Nationwide's name do it as well. And so I think that's a large part of it, is that the LGBTQ political movement got their hooks in, large swaths of corporate America and of the hospital systems. And this just became the next big thing that they were pushing.
This just sounds like a huge behemoth with all kinds of tentacles that are reaching everywhere. So again, going back to the consumer piece, like what can we do, like aside from voting with our wallets, essentially, like how do we as everyday citizens continue to drive home that message and fight this worldview by saying we've had enough, we don't want you supporting this stuff?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think as people who generally favor the free market, we have an inclination to say, like, I'm going to vote with my wallet, as you just noted, which we should always do, of course. You should punish companies monetarily that don't reflect your values. And I would hope that it's a very small sliver of the country for whom not mutilating children isn't one of their core values, right? So I think most consumers would not want to think that the profits derived from their purchases are harming kids. That said, we should not sleep on the importance of using our voice. HRC and these political movements and the far left did not hijack corporate America by just using their wallets. They were never large enough to do that. They badgered and hassled and attacked these companies. And these companies are extremely sensitive about their brands and being attacked in the media and on social media. And we saw that with Bud Light and the backlash that has had. We saw that with Target. Target has, I'm not saying they're perfect, but it's clear that they are at least trying to turn the ship around. And we should continue to monitor them. And if they slip, they should be punished for that. But it's clear that they are activities at their stores, pushing the more patriotic stuff, pushing more Christmas stuff, sometimes even avowedly religious things during Christmas. It's clear that they have gotten the message that they've been punished by the consumer, both monetarily, but also their brand has been punished. And so, like I said, we have the woke alerts that you can sign up for at our website, consumersresearch.org. We always make sure to include contact information for the company and their handles on social media so that you can blow them up on social media and you can call them, because I promise you, I hear through back channels or corporate America all the time, sending emails, making phone calls and saying, I don't like your company anymore. I used to be a shopper. I used to use your services. I'm not doing it again until you clean this up. When those come in mass, it absolutely does make a difference. And it paired with a decline in sales, it can send shockwaves through C-suites. And especially now that corporate America has to worry about enforcement of civil rights laws and all kinds of stuff that they didn't before. Now that Trump is in the White House, that has like I said, an amplifying effect. It's doubling or tripling the effect of those types of movements. They are terrified of ending up being the next Target or the next Bud Light. So when you even start kicking snowballs down the mountain, okay, they start seeing the idea of an avalanche coming at them. And so we highly recommend people use their wallet, but also use their voice.
Well, as we keep an eye out for the things that might be changing, the words that they're using that could be attempting to hide what's been going on, that's still going on. I know you're going to shine a light on that, Will. So give us that website one more time and tell our listeners where they can plug in and follow your work to stay apprised on everything.
Absolutely. Well, I recommend anybody who wants to be a happy warrior and push back on corporate America's wokeness, join us at consumersresearch.org. That's consumersresearch.org. And right up at the top, you'll see a button for woke alerts. Just put your phone number in there. I promise you won't get spammed. We don't hit you up every day. This is just an ability for us to activate people like your listeners who are sick and tired of seeing corporate America act this way. And for people who are on Twitter, or I guess X now, I hate saying that because it sounds like some sort of weird porn site. But for the website formerly known as Twitter, people can follow me at Will Hild. That's at WILLHILD.
Great. Well, Will, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for your time today. It was great to have you as a guest on The Narrative.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Westler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan. We'll see you next time on The Narrative.